The sun-hollowed desert didn't speak. It only watched. It watched through the wind that howled over bones, through the sand that whispered across forgotten trails. And in the middle of that silence, a woman rode alone. Her name was Emily Dusk. They called her the Ghost of the West, the widow of Redwind, the woman who walked out of fire without blinking. But to those who met her in person, she was simply quiet and dangerous. She didn't smile. She didn't explain. And she didn't miss. That afternoon, she arrived at a half-collapsed watering post, the kind left behind when train routes changed and promises dried up. As she dismounted from her gray horse Flint, her hand hovered over the revolver at her hip. She didn't trust stillness. It had betrayed her before. A faint sound creaked inside the structure. She moved slowly, stepped through the shadowed doorway, and saw it movement small and fast behind a rotted barrel. Emily said nothing. She crouched low and waited. Wide brown eyes peeked out. A girl no more than 10, dust-caked and shaking eyes too tired for her age. Emily set her canteen on the floor and backed away. The girl snatched it, drank too fast, then choked. Emily didn't move. "Name?" she asked. "Lena," the girl rasped. "Where's your family gone?" "Black hats," the girl nodded. Emily's jaw tightened. The black spurs. She'd buried enough of them to know their habits. "You alone now?" "I think so." Emily stood. "Not anymore." That night, they camped beneath a ledge. The wind kicked up sand, but the rocks shielded their small fire. Lena fell asleep, curled beneath an old blanket Emily had pulled from her saddle. But Emily didn't sleep. She never did when it was too quiet. Her rifle lay across her lap, and sure enough, just before midnight, she heard the faint thump of hooves. She moved without sound, crept to the edge of the rocks. 3 riders, spurs glinting, guns ready. Emily waited until the first man came into clear view. Then she shot. 1 down. The second shouted but didn't have time to aim. Her second bullet found his neck. The third turned his horse trying to escape. Emily raised the rifle, held her breath, and fired. Silence fell again. Emily dragged the bodies into a crevice-kicked sand over the blood, then returned to the fire where Lena still slept. She watched the girl's face for a moment, then sat beside her and kept watch until dawn. They rode east the next day. Emily told Lena about a town called Red Mesa. "We'll find someone to take you in," she said. But when they reached the ridge above town, something felt wrong. It was too still. Emily saw shadows where men stood watching, guns in hand, the black horseshoe symbol of the spurs carved into the sheriff's door. She turned to Lena. "They're waiting." "It's a trap." "Then what do? We choose our battlefield." Emily led them away from Red Mesa toward a place she'd sworn never to return, to the ruins of an old gold mine. It had walls. It had cover. And it had ghosts enough to make the spurs hesitate. They arrived at sunset. Emily set traps. She showed Lena where to hide, how to reload. She handed her a small revolver. "Only if someone gets close." "Understand," Lena nodded. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She was learning. The spurs came at midnight. First 4, then 6. Emily fired from the shadows, dropped 3 before they knew where she was. Lena's shot missed, but her second found a man's arm. He screamed. Emily rolled, reloaded, kept moving. Then he came Riker Vane. a legend soaked in blood and smoke, taller than she remembered, eyes like ash. "Give me the girl," he said, "and maybe I let you crawl away." "Come take her," Emily answered. He fired first. She dove, rolled, and shot him in the side. He staggered, fired again, missed. They moved like wolves in dust until Lena, from behind a crate, fired once more. Her bullet caught Riker in the leg. He fell. Emily approached, revolver raised. Riker grinned. "Do it." She looked down at him. "You're not worth the last bullet." And she walked away. They rode again by dawn. The mine behind them, the desert opening ahead. They carried the ledger proof of everything. Names, places, betrayals. And somewhere beyond the rising sun, justice waited. Not in a courtroom, but in a woman with a gun. And a girl who would never forget what silence had cost her. They rode hard for 3 days, skirting the main roads, moving through dry gullies and forgotten trails where the wind could cover their tracks. Emily didn't say much. She kept her eyes on the skyline and one hand near her revolver at all times. Lena sat behind her on the saddle, silent, alert, and different than she had been. Something inside her had shifted since the night of the mine. Not hardened, not broken, just clearer. She no longer asked when they would stop or where they were going. She knew it didn't matter. Not until the ledger was in the right hands. On the 4th morning, they approached a weathered outpost perched on the edge of a cliff, the Dalton Telegraph Station. It looked like it hadn't seen company in months, maybe years. A single pole leaned into the wind wire, still attached, humming softly with a ghost of old messages. Emily dismounted. "Stay with the horse," she told Lena, then stepped up onto the porch and pushed open the door. Inside, a man with spectacles and a crooked spine sat behind a desk, half asleep, with a mug of stale coffee. He looked up when she entered, startled. "You send messages?" she asked. "Only if you pay," he grunted. Emily pulled the envelope from inside her coat, sealed with a strip of black wax, pressed with the ring of Judge Hale. "This goes to Amarillo, New Laredo, and San Antonio." Exact words. No delay. He opened it, eyes widening as he scanned the contents. "This is official." "It's more than that," Emily said. "It's the first stone in an avalanche." The man nodded slowly and began tapping the keys. Outside, Lena kept watch. She had Emily's old rifle resting across her lap, just in case. And she needed it. 10 minutes after Emily went inside, a rider appeared at the edge of the ridge, a man in a black coat, watching. Then another joined him. Then a third. Lena stood, whistled once sharp and fast. Emily came out immediately, already reloading her Colt. "3 of them," Lena said, voice steady. Emily nodded. "Get down." She walked out onto the porch, rifle in hand. "You're too late," she shouted. "The message is sent." The men didn't answer. They just raised their weapons. Emily fired first. The first man dropped chest, snapped back with the force of the bullet. The second returned fire, missed, ducked behind a rock. Lena took a shot. The third tried to circle around, but Emily was faster. 2 more shots, 2 more bodies on the sand. Then stillness again. Emily stepped over the closest man and looked toward the distant ridge. Nothing moved. "They'll send more," Lena said. "They always do." "Not soon enough," Emily replied. "We move now." The telegraph operator appeared in the doorway, pale but determined. It sent. Every word. Then history just changed, Emily said. She looked at Lena. Mount up. They rode north now, not to hide, but to wait to see what the world would do with the truth now that it could no longer ignore it. Emily didn't believe in happy endings, but she believed in follow-through. She believed that justice wasn't something you found, it was something you made one bullet, one name, one ride at a time. And now she wasn't riding alone. They didn't speak much that evening as they rode through the canyons that bordered the northern flats, letting the last warmth of daylight slide off their shoulders while shadows stretched long across the trail. The air smelled different here, less dust, more pine, like they were riding into a part of the land that still remembered what rain tasted like. Lena rested her head against Emily's back, not because she was tired, though she was, but because that was the safest place she knew in the world now. And Emily didn't say it aloud, but she didn't mind the wait. They reached a small grove before nightfall, tucked beneath a slope where the wind quieted and the moonlight filtered through needles instead of sand. Emily checked their perimeter, placed a few stones in a pattern around their camp, more instinct than strategy, and finally sat down against the base of a tree, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Lena stirred the last of the beans from their rations, divided it between two small tins, handed one over. "Do you think anyone will listen?" she asked. "About the names, the ledger, the spurs." Emily took a bite before answering. "Some will. Some will look away. But the ones who matter won't be able to pretend anymore." Lena was quiet for a moment. "You think the judge will be okay, Hale?" Emily nodded slightly. "He's old, but not dumb. He sent copies, I'm sure of it. Even if something happens to him, what we sent's already lit the fuse." Lena pulled her knees to her chest. "And what if the fuse burns out?" Emily looked at her, really looked. The kind of look that sees straight through a person's fear. "Then we ride again. And we light another one." They rose early. Emily woke with the sun and didn't need to wake Lena. She was already up, already checking the saddlebags like Emily had taught her. They rode with purpose now, headed toward Dustford, where Emily had heard rumors of a federal marshal gathering forces. She didn't trust federals, but she trusted their ability to make noise, and noise was what she needed right now. Not whispers, not secrets. Noise that would rattle the walls of every saloon and courthouse where a man named in the ledger still breathed easy. The trail was quiet until midday, when they spotted smoke curling above a bluff to the west. Too close to be a campfire. Too controlled to be accidental. Emily motioned to slow. They approached on foot the last stretch, moving between scrub and stone. What they found made Emily's stomach turn. A wagon overturned, crates scattered, and two bodies face down shot in the back. On one of the crates was a mark burned into the wood, a black horseshoe. Lena said nothing. Emily didn't either. There was no point. They buried the bodies beneath a low tree and placed a single rock at their head. Then they burned the wagon. Not for revenge, for warning. For every rider who might pass and know that this trail was being watched now. By evening, they reached a high ridge that overlooked Dustford. The town was smaller than Emily remembered, just a church, a water tower, and a line of buildings clinging to life like old dogs clinging to breath. But below, near the south edge, she saw what she hoped for: flags. Blue uniforms. Riders. The beginning of something official. They descended slow, careful not to draw too much attention. But it was too late for that. By the time they reached the main street, eyes were already on them. One man stepped forward, tall black coat, silver badge on his chest. "You're Emily Dusk?" he asked. Emily didn't answer. Just looked past him. "Who's in charge here, Judge Bellamy?" the man said. "He's waiting for you." Emily dismounted. Lena slid down beside her. Together they walked past the stairs, past the whispers, toward the one building that still had its windows intact. If Dusford was the first stone in a new foundation, then it needed to see who had carried the truth this far. And it needed to remember the shape of her shadow. The makeshift courthouse was nothing more than an old town hall with the pews pushed aside and two long tables dragged to the center. Dust hung in the air like breath in winter, even though it was summer. The windows were shuttered, the only light coming from two lanterns on the judge's bench and the open door where Emily and Lena now stood. Bellamy was already inside, a tall, broad man with a weather-worn face and a voice that could carry over a battlefield if needed. He looked up when they entered and didn't smile. "You made it." "So did you," Emily replied. "Barely," he said, gesturing for them to sit. Lena stayed standing. Emily didn't argue. "We received the wire," Bellamy continued. "All three cities did. Marshal Drenner from Amarillo's camped 2 miles out with 25 men. San Antonio wants confirmation before they move, and New Laredo's judge is apparently sleeping with one eye open." Emily dropped the ledger on the table with a soft thud. "That's the confirmation." Bellamy opened it, scanned the top page. "You know this name's half the territory's lawmen, don't you? Then they shouldn't have sold their souls," Emily said. Bellamy sighed, closed the book, and looked at Lena. "You, the witness," she nodded. "I saw everything." "You prepared to speak it. I already did," Lena said. The wire said it all. Bellamy sat back. "Still, they'll ask for more. Paper isn't enough for men who think they can burn it." Emily leaned forward. "Then we give them a fire they can't put out." The next day, the hearing began not with a gavel, but with the sound of chairs scraping and boots scuffing dry floors. There was no jury, no reporters, just armed marshals, a judge, and two people who'd brought the weight of 100 lies in a single book. Lena spoke first. She stood at the front, small but steady, her voice carrying as she named names and told what her father had written, what he had seen, what he had died protecting. No one interrupted. No one doubted. When she finished, Bellamy turned to Emily. "And you, Miss Dusk. You've delivered this ledger. You've stood in the path of men who kill without asking names. What do you expect to come from this?" Emily looked at him. "A reckoning." "Justice, no," she said. "Justice was never part of this land. But now they'll know someone's still keeping count." When the hearing ended, Bellamy stood on the steps of the courthouse and read aloud the first warrant's 34 names. Sheriffs, deputies, judges, men in suits and men in dusters. The town went still. The air around the flagpole stopped moving. And Emily knew at that moment everything had changed. That night, she sat with Lena and Boone, who had ridden in 2 days earlier, bruised but breathing. He hadn't said much since arriving. Just grinned, coughed, and said, "Miss the party didn't." Emily poured him a tin of coffee. "We saved you a seat." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft sound of horses moving in the pens. Boone looked at Emily. "So what now the law rides out," she said. "Now people start asking questions they were too scared to ask." "And us?" Lena asked. Emily looked at her, then at Boone. "We ride where they can't. We go after the names that won't wait for the law." Boone stretched his leg, wincing. "Sounds like a short retirement." "There never was one," Emily said. By morning, the wind had shifted. The first posse rode out toward Black Hollow. Another toward Sweet River. Dustford was no longer a town at the edge of nothing. It had become the start of something else. Something harder. Something necessary. Emily stood beside her horse, adjusting the straps. Lena climbed up behind her without a word. Boone mounted slowly, muttering about his ribs. Emily looked north. "We start with Wendell Pike?" Slave runner Boone asked. "Worse," she said. "He sells people and pays judges to look the other way." "Think he knows we're coming?" "Not yet," Emily said. "But he will." And with that, they rode again, not to escape, not to hide, but to carry the storm with them. They didn't follow the road. Roads were for men who believed in signs, in maps, and safe passage. Emily, Boone, and Lena took the old cattle paths that hadn't seen hooves in years, weaving through dry valleys and sun-cracked hills where vultures circled slowly overhead like black stains against the sky. The trail to Wendell Pike's ranch wasn't on any official route, but Emily remembered it well. She had passed it once before long ago, when she still believed killing one bad man could make a difference. Pike's land lay between two canyons, its main house built like a fortress, high walls, watchtowers, and enough hired guns to fool themselves into thinking fear was security. Emily studied the place from a ridge a mile out. "Two guards at the gate, another patrolling the east slope," she murmured. Boone wiped his brow. "Think they'll talk or shoot first doesn't matter," Emily said. "They won't get a second shot." Lena sat beside her, holding a spyglass they'd borrowed from Dustford. "There's a wagon out back. Looks like they're loading people into it." Emily's jaw clenched. Then we're not waiting. They rode down at twilight fast and low through the dry riverbed that wrapped around Pike's land. Emily didn't aim for the gate. She aimed for the weak point, the southern fence, where the brush grew thick and the guards rarely looked twice. They slipped through the shadows, moving like wolves. Boone took the left. Emily the right. Lena stayed in the center, just behind. As they neared the side barn, they heard it chains. A man's voice begging softly. The thud of boots against ribs. Emily didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle and shot the man standing over the prisoner. The crack of the bullet broke the quiet like a curse. Everything moved fast after that. Guards shouted horses, neighed, doors slammed. Boone kicked open the barn door and shouted, "You want justice. You're looking at it." Emily rushed inside, covering Lena as she ran to unlock the wagon. 4 people, 2 women, a boy, and an old man blinked in shock as she cut their bindings. "You're safe," Lena said. "But move now." One of the women pointed toward the main house. "Pike's in there. He won't leave. He thinks no one dares touch him." Emily handed her a key. "Get the others and go. We'll handle him." She didn't knock on Pike's door. She kicked it open. The inside smelled of wine and wax, a room too clean for a man who made his money in blood. Wendell Pike sat in a leather chair, legs crossed, sipping calmly from a silver cup. He didn't look surprised. "Emily Dusk," he said. "The legend herself. Come to kill me, come to end it," she said. He raised his glass. "You think you've won something because a judge in a nowhere town signed a piece of paper." "No," she said. "I think you lost everything the moment your name hit the wire." He stood slowly. "You have no idea how deep the roots go. Then I'll dig." Pike reached for a pistol on the table. Emily shot him through the hand. He screamed, "Drop the gun." She walked over, aimed again. "You don't get to fight back," she said. "You get to stand trial." "Trial," he spat. "This is the West. There are no trials out here. That's where you're wrong." She struck him with the butt of her gun and dragged him outside. By the time they rode back toward Dustford, the wagon behind them carried more than a criminal. It carried a message. That no ranch was too far. No wall too high. That Emily Dusk was still riding. Lena looked back at Pike, tied and bloodied, and said he doesn't look like he thought he'd lose. "None of them do," Emily replied, "until they already have." Boone rode up beside them quiet for a while. Then he said, "What happens when we run out of names?" Emily looked ahead toward the next horizon. "Then we ride for the ones they tried to erase." Dustford was no longer the town it had been when they first rode in. The smell of smoke still lingered from campfires that never fully died, and the boots on the ground weren't wandering anymore. They marched. Since the day the first warrants were read, men with badges had arrived from as far as the southern rivers, some bringing evidence, others just rumors, but all of them wanting to be part of whatever was building there. When Emily Boone and Lena returned, dragging Wendell Pike in a prison cart, no one needed to ask who he was. They saw the blood on his hands and the defeat in his eyes. Pike didn't speak on the ride in. He didn't beg. He just stared ahead like a man realizing for the first time that the world had grown teeth. Marshal Drenner met them at the edge of town. He glanced at Emily, then at the prisoners in the wagon. "More?" he asked. "Enough to keep you busy," Emily said. "You want me to take him in?" "No," she said. "You'll just hold him. Bellamy will try him in front of every rider in this territory." "Public hearing," Boone muttered. "That'll draw a crowd." "That's the point," Emily said. "Let them see what falling looks like." The hearing took place 2 days later in front of the general store, where planks were turned into benches and the church bell was rung for the first time in years to signal the start. Wendell Pike stood with both hands bound, bruised and pale, but silent. Bellamy read aloud the charges: trafficking, bribery, murder by proxy, obstruction of justice, and 6 counts of conspiracy to enslave free citizens. Emily and Lena sat beside each other near the front. Boone leaned against a support post, arms crossed, hat low. Lena gave testimony again, not because it was required, but because Emily asked her to. And she delivered it the same way she had in the barn, in the canyons under fire, with clear eyes and a steady voice. When it was over, the judge asked Pike if he had anything to say. He lifted his head slowly, voice raspy. "I built roads. I paid sheriffs. I fed towns that would have starved." "And what did you take in return?" Bellamy asked. Pike didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was loud enough. That night they didn't celebrate. Justice wasn't a thing you toasted to. It was a thing you loaded, aimed, and fired again and again until the noise of lies stopped ringing. Emily walked the town edge at dusk alone until Lena caught up. "Are we done here?" the girl asked. "Here, yes," Emily said. "But not everywhere." "Where's next?" Emily looked toward the east, where the sky was beginning to bruise with storm clouds. "There's a man named Cord Fallon," she said. "Used to be a lawman. Now runs arms through the tribal borders. He's on page 37. Then we go," Lena said. "We go." Boone met them at the stables the next morning. "Didn't think we'd ride again this soon," he said, handing Emily a pouch of dried meat and extra rounds. "Didn't think we'd ever stop," she replied. "You ready?" He rolled his shoulder. "Still sore. But I like the noise." "Then let's ride," Emily said. And once again, with the dust rising behind them, they left the edge of law and rode toward where it failed, ready to hold the line where no one else dared. The trail to Cord Fallon's territory was longer, rougher, and meaner than any they had taken before. It cut through ravines where no birds sang, across salt plains that cracked beneath the hooves of their horses, and past outposts where fear had already beaten them to the door. Fallon wasn't just another outlaw with a gang and a secret. He was something worse, a man who used to believe in the law and then twisted it to build his empire. Years ago, he had worn a badge in El Cobra, cleaned up 2 towns, and helped hang a man who deserved it. But power didn't sit still in a place like this. It grew crooked, and Fallon grew with it. Now he ran weapons from border stations into territories still holding on by their teeth, and the people he left behind didn't dare speak his name above a whisper. Emily had crossed paths with him once before. She remembered his voice, slick as oil and twice as flammable. When she'd looked into his eyes that night, she didn't see malice, she saw calculation. That was worse. You could scare a cruel man. You couldn't scare a man who didn't care about burning everything down as long as he got to choose what rose from the ashes. They stopped at a trading post 2 nights out, a half-buried structure beneath a sandstone ridge where an old woman sold coffee, bandages, and secrets. Boone asked for directions. She poured him a cup and said, "You're going the right way if you want to find death." Emily leaned on the counter. "We're not looking for death. Just the man who thinks he owns it." The woman nodded toward the cliffs to the southeast. "Fallon's got a compound there. Men with rifles on every wall. He doesn't hide because no one's ever walked in and walked back out." "Then we'll have to change that," Emily said. They made camp that night on a shelf overlooking a canyon basin. The moon was high silver and quiet. Boone cooked a strip of meat over a low fire, while Lena cleaned her revolver in silence. "Do you ever wonder if they'll stop chasing us?" she asked. Emily looked up from where she was sharpening her knife. "They're not chasing us. We're chasing them. But what if we catch all of them? Then we chase what comes next." The next morning, they reached the ridge. Below them, the compound stretched wide, 4 towers, 24 armed men, and a central building with smoke rising from its chimney. Emily counted the patterns of the patrol. Boone measured the distance to the nearest cover. Lena drew a rough sketch in the sand. "One blind spot," she said. "Behind the eastern storehouse. They don't patrol it. Probably think no one would be stupid enough to climb the cliff." "They're not wrong," Boone muttered. Emily stood. "That's where we go." They waited until sunset, when the shadows grew long and the wind kicked dust high enough to mask sound. They moved fast, Boone first, then Lena, then Emily sliding down the cliffside using every bush, every stone as cover. By the time they reached the edge of the compound, the sky was bleeding red. Emily signaled. Boone went left. Lena crept toward the tower base. Emily slipped into the side entrance of the storehouse, silent as smoke. Inside, crates of rifles stacked shoulder high. Enough firepower to burn down 3 counties. She found the ledger copy's roots, buyer's dates. Fallon was more organized than she expected. That would make his fall even sweeter. Then she heard it, a voice behind her. Looking for souvenirs, Cord Fallon stood in the doorway, a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. I figured you'd come eventually. You always did have a thing for unfinished business. Emily didn't flinch. This time, I'm here to finish it. You won't shoot me, Dusk. You're too poetic. You want me to face trial, to see the inside of a cell. You're half right, she said, and threw the knife in her hand. It caught him in the shoulder. He dropped the lantern. She rushed forward, gun drawn. He fired once, missed. She hit him in the knee with her boot and slammed the revolver into the side of his head. He collapsed. Boone and Lena burst in seconds later. Boone checked the window. We've got 30 seconds before they notice. Emily grabbed the ledger copies, tied Fallon's hands with his own belt. Then we'd better make them count. They escaped through the drainage tunnel under the east wall. By the time the guards realized their boss was missing Emily, and her crew were already riding into the dark, dragging a bleeding Cord Fallon behind them. He cursed, spit, threatened. Emily said nothing. Boone rode beside her, quiet as usual. Lena held the ledgers tight to her chest. One more, she said. Emily glanced at Fallon. One more to show the world what silence protects. The journey back to Dustford took longer than expected, not because of the terrain, but because of the weight they carried. Not just Fallon's body strapped to a second horse half-conscious and grumbling, but the truth in Lena's pack, evidence of an empire built on betrayal, documented in Fallon's own handwriting. Each night they made camp, Emily would sit beside the fire and stare at those pages by lantern light. She didn't read them all. Some names were better left unknown until the right hour, but she saw enough to understand how deep the rot had spread. Lawmen, judges, trade post owners. Some names she recognized. Some she didn't. But the message was clear. The sickness wasn't confined to one town or one man. It was woven into the cracks of the frontier itself. Boone noticed her quiet. He didn't ask. Instead, he kept watch through most nights, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the darkness, like it whispered secrets only he could hear. Lena, once full of questions, now rode with a silence of her own. She wasn't afraid Emily had seen her face fear and not blink. But something was growing behind her eyes. Something heavy and old, the way pain aged fast when worn too young. On the 4th night, Fallon spoke. His voice was dry and sharp, like a man scraping rust from old armor. You think you're fixing something, he rasped. You're not. You're just dragging corpses into daylight and acting surprised when they stink. Emily didn't turn to look at him. You had a choice. I still do, he said. You kill me now, they call you a murderer. You try me, the ones in shadows pull the strings and bury the outcome in paperwork. Maybe, she said, but at least they'll have to look up from their dinner for a moment. Fallon laughed, then coughed, then fell silent again. They reached Dustford just after sunrise on the 6th day. The town had changed. Posters of missing girls had been taken down. A school bell now rang at noon. There were new nails on old doors and children played in alleys that once whispered with danger. Marshal Drenner stood waiting near the stable, eyes narrowing as he saw Fallon tied up like a package no one wanted to claim. "You're bringing him here?" he asked. "You want my jail to explode? We're not staying," Emily said. "You hold him. You guard the papers. Bellamy's men will be here tomorrow." And then Boone asked, "Then we burn the rest." That night the town gathered again, this time in the square, without order or trial. Fallon had been locked up, but his name traveled faster than a fire wind. People didn't come to see blood. They came to see the shape of a broken promise. Lena stood on the steps of the general store, holding up the ledgers for all to see. "He didn't just move weapons," she said. "He bought law. He sold safety. He traded us like cattle because no one ever stopped him." Emily stood beside her. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked them all in the eyes, one by one. "This doesn't end with him. You know that. But it starts with him. And it starts tonight." The next day, Bellamy's riders came, 5 men in gray dusters and hard expressions. They took Fallon into custody, cataloged the evidence, and promised an open court date in Fort Blessing. Emily didn't wait for the trial. She packed her bag, filled 2 canteens, and left town before the sun crested high. Boone caught up with her an hour later. "Thought you'd wait at least to hear the verdict." "I don't need to hear what I already know," she said. "He's not the end." Lena joined them at the trailhead, rifle across her back hat pulled low. "Where to next?" Emily glanced at a folded map tucked into her saddlebag. "North," she said. "The mines. There's a name scratched in that ledger I remember hearing back when I still wore spurs. Owen Reich. He runs silver camps with iron fists. And I'm guessing they don't have a church or a sheriff," Boone muttered. "They have graves. Fresh ones," Emily said. And so they rode again, not for justice as a word, but as a wound that needed tending. And behind them, Dustford stood not as a symbol of victory, but as proof that a few good hands could carve order into the wilderness, even if just for a season. The northern trail was crueler than they remembered. It twisted through windswept passes where nothing grew but thorn brush and regret, then dropped into canyons that felt like the ribs of some long-dead beast. The wind-up here had a voice of its own, dry, bitter, and old. Owen Reich's name hadn't passed through mouths in years, but the mine workers still knew his boots. He didn't need posters or threats. He paid in silence and buried disobedience under rockfall or forged contracts. The man didn't run from the law, he built walls. Thick enough the law bounced off like dust in the wind. Emily didn't speak much on the ride north. The events of Dustford hung behind her like a shadow that reached a little too far. Lena had grown quiet, her sharp glances softening into worry. Boone stayed steady, as always, though his hands rested longer on his rifle now, not out of fear, but habit. They reached the edge of the mining territory at dusk on the 7th day. From the cliff above, they saw the settlement lights flickering like dying stars, workers moving like ghosts. No songs. No fire smoke. Just the grind of iron on stone. "We're not riding in the front gate," Boone said. "They've got watchers, dogs, and probably half the miners owed to him in blood." Emily nodded. "Then we find someone who wants out." That night they crept into the lower camp, where tents sagged and boots never came off. Lena slipped between shadows, listening to whispers. Boone bribed a cook with coffee and a story. Emily found a man named Jed Hands, split eyes yellowed from too little sun. He didn't recognize her, but when she mentioned Reich's name, he tensed like a whip. "You trying to get buried?" he asked. "No," she said. "Trying to dig something up." Jed talked. Not all at once, but enough. Reich used the miners as leverage. Their families, their homes, their bodies. He owned the freight wagons and the counting scales. If you cheated him, you disappeared. If you obeyed, you starved slower. "He doesn't sleep in the camp," Jed whispered. "He's got a place an old gambling hall turned stone house. Up the bluff. Walled in. Guards with lanterns all night. How many doesn't matter. They don't miss. And if you get in, there's no getting out." They waited for a storm. 2 days later, the sky turned black like it had been cursed. Lightning cracked over the cliffs, and the guards huddled under tarps, while the rain swallowed their visibility. Emily Boone and Lena climbed the bluff, slick with mud. The wall around Reich's home wasn't stone, it was fear. But fear could be stepped over if you knew how not to tremble. Inside, Reich was exactly how Emily remembered from the story's clean nails velvet vest face, like marble, with eyes that never moved unless he wanted something. He was pouring wine when she burst through the door. "You should have stayed south," he said without turning. "Fallon talked," she replied. "You're next." He raised his glass. "Then let's toast to inevitability." Boone kicked the door shut. Lena covered the hallway with her rifle. Emily walked forward, revolver low but ready. "The men downstairs, the ones breaking their backs for silver, how long do you think they'll stay loyal when they learn you're not untouchable?" "You going to give them a speech?" he asked. "Or just a corpse?" "Neither," she said. "I'm giving them a key." She threw the ledger onto his table, Fallon's filled with connections, trade names, and Reich's initials next to 6 deliveries of arms to control the miners. Reich paled. "This doesn't matter." "It will," she said. "By morning, it'll be in the hands of 3 newspapers and the governor's men." "You think law cares," he hissed. "Law's just a dog that sits when paid." "Then I'll make it bark." He moved fast-drawn gun twist of shoulder, but Emily was faster. She didn't aim to kill. One shot to the leg dropped him. Boone disarmed him. Lena cuffed his hands with the same chain he used on his workers. Outside, the storm began to die. The sky broke into slivers of blue. And from the ridge they could see torches lighting in the worker camp, 1, then 5, then dozens. Not fire of destruction. Fire of awakening. As dawn cracked open, Emily rode down the bluff with Reich in tow. She didn't smile. She didn't raise a flag. She just rode straight into the crowd, dropped him from the saddle, and said, "He's not your master anymore." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. And in it, she knew justice wasn't a law. It was a choice. One you had to make again, and again, and again. The miners didn't cheer. They didn't riot. They just looked. Dozens of soot-streaked faces, weathered and hollow-eyed, stared down at the man who had chained their lives to the weight of silver. Owen Reich lay in the dirt, trying to sit up his velvet vest, soaked through with blood and rain. His mouth opened to command, to threaten, to beg, but nothing came out. No one helped him. Emily stepped back, giving space not for vengeance, but for realization. "You don't need me anymore," she said, voice low but clear. "The gates are open. Your chains are gone. But you've got to walk out on your own." Lena moved beside her rifle across her back, watching the miners, not Reich. Some were still holding tools. One man dropped a pickaxe. It hit the mud with a thud that echoed too far. Then slowly, one by one, they began to move toward the camp, toward the hills, toward each other. They didn't trample Reich. They didn't spit. They left him there like a broken lock, no longer holding anything shut. Boone was the last to mount up. "You really think this ends it?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "Not even close." "Then why smile because something cracked today? Might not be loud, might not be fast, but it cracked." They rode west, leaving the mines behind like a story they'd finished reading. They didn't say much. The desert didn't ask for stories. It just listened. Somewhere beyond the ridge, past the dry riverbeds and broken chapels, was another place that needed reckoning. But for now, they let the wind carry their silence. 2 days later, they passed through a nameless outpost, one saloon, 2 horses, and a preacher who didn't preach unless paid. Word had traveled ahead of them. The barkeep poured them free whiskey. A woman gave Lena a pair of boots. No one asked questions. They just nodded with a look Emily had seen before, not gratitude, but hope. Quiet, cautious hope. That night, under a sky littered with stars, Lena finally spoke. "What made you start this?" Emily didn't answer right away. She was watching the flames. "When I was 16, I saw a marshal hang a man for stealing a loaf of bread," she said. Next day, that same marshal took $5 from a cattle boss to look the other way while his men burned down a family's farm. She paused. "I realize law ain't about right or wrong. It's about who has the rope. So I figured, maybe someone ought to start cutting ropes." Boone took a sip of his coffee. "You ever think about stopping every morning?" she said. "And every time I don't." Lena leaned back, eyes on the stars. "We're gonna die doing this." Emily gave a dry laugh. "Probably. But I'd rather die cutting ropes than tying 'em." The next day brought dust and vultures. A rider approached near sundown, young desperate coat torn at the seams. He waved them down, eyes wide. "Please, there's a town Lark's Way, 2 valleys over. Men came last week. Took over. Took everything. Sheriff's dead. My sister's still there." He didn't have to say more. Emily looked at Boone. He nodded. Lena was already tightening her saddle. And so the trail curved again. Another wound on the map. Another fire to walk into. But they didn't flinch. Emily adjusted the brim of her hat. "Then let's ride before dark swallows the road." 3 horses galloped west, and the dust behind them curled like smoke. The road to Lark's Way ran like a scar across the belly of the desert. Dry gullies crossed it like veins, and the sun, though near setting, still burned with a tired anger. Emily rode ahead, eyes fixed, not on the horizon, but on the feel of the wind, how it shifted, how it warned. She had learned to read the desert's breath long ago. By midnight, they camped beneath a ridge shaped like a broken fang. The boy who had found them, Nathan, barely spoke. He stared at the fire like it might answer a prayer he hadn't dared say aloud. "She's 14, he finally muttered, hands tight around a canteen. "She thinks I'm dead." "You're not," Emily said. And neither is she. Not yet. You don't know these men. We don't have to, Lena said from her corner. We know what they do. Boone stood watch that night, and when morning cracked the ridge in half, they were already saddled. Lark's Way came into view like a bruise on the sand, too quiet, too still. Smoke curled from a barn that should have been long out of chores. The church bell hung crooked, unmoved. They approached from the east, past the wheat fields now trampled under boot and hoof. Emily dismounted behind a knotted fence and looked through her spyglass. 4 on the porch, she said. 2 rifles. 1 shotgun. The others drunk or stupid. Boone pointed toward the sheriff's office. They've got someone inside. Movement but no light. Could be prisoners. Could be bait, Lena muttered. Emily turned to Nathan. Where would they keep your sister if they haven't sold her? He swallowed. They'd lock her in the mayor's house. South End. It's the only place with a working cellar. Emily studied the layout. The gang had made themselves comfortable but not careful. That was a mistake. Comfort bred habits. And habits were easy to crack. We split, she said. Boone takes the jail. Lena with me to the mayor's. Nathan, stay here. I can fight. Then stay alive. That's your fight. They moved like shadows, not rushing, not hesitating. Emily and Lena crept past the general store where broken glass winked in the dust. A dog barked once, then whimpered, recognizing not threat but purpose. At the mayor's house, 2 guards sat on the steps playing cards. Their pistols were loose in holsters, more ornament than readiness. Emily signaled. 1 breath. 2. 3. The first guard slumped with a dart to the throat. The second never turned fast enough. Lena's knife caught him in the ribs. No sound. Just the thud of carelessness meeting skill. Inside, they found the cellar door locked. Emily knelt listening. A faint rustle. Then a voice scared but strong. Nathan, she's here, Emily whispered. Stand back. 1 kick splintered the latch. The girl blinked up through the dark, bruised, hungry but unbroken. We're friends, Lena said gently, pulling her up. Your brother sent us. She clung to them like driftwood in a flood. Meanwhile, Boone had reached the jail. He didn't knock. He kicked the door in scattering cards and curses. 2 men reached for guns. Boone shot first. Not to kill yet. 1 dropped bleeding from the leg. The other ran straight into the stock of Boone's rifle. Inside the cells, a deputy blinked behind bars. You him? He rasped. The one they said was coming, no, Boone said, unlocking the cell. I'm worse. As the town stirred to chaos, the rest of the gang fumbled awake, realizing too late that their hold had cracked. Emily stood in the middle of the main road, the girl at her side. You've lost, she called out. Run now, and maybe the desert will forget your names. One of the men raised a shotgun. Boone dropped him from behind. The others fled, not cowards, just survivors. Emily didn't chase. She watched the dust swallow them. Lark's Way didn't cheer. It exhaled, like a town that had been holding its breath for too long. The girl reunited with her brother under a sky finally turning blue. The townsfolk came slowly, eyes wide, unsure. Emily tipped her hat. This place is yours again. Keep it that way. An old man, Maybe the preacher, maybe just someone who remembered what kindness looked like, offered a nod. "Who are you people?" "We're no one," Emily said. "Just passing through." But as they rode out under the setting sun, whispers followed them. Not of bounty, not of legend. Just three names carried on the wind like a hymn. Boone, Lena, and the woman with the eyes like desert fire. They rode without talking for a long time, letting the hush of victory settle into their bones like a quiet rain after a long drought. Behind them, Larksway returned to itself. Doors creaked open again. Shop signs were hung back on crooked nails, and children peeked out of windows, no longer shuttered by fear. But ahead of them lay more road, more dust, more stories that hadn't yet found their ending. The trail west wound through scorched canyons and valleys, so still that even the wind seemed to whisper apologies. It was Lena who broke the silence first. "That girl," she said. "She didn't cry." Emily nodded. "Some kids run out of tears before they're old enough to count them." Boone, riding a little ahead, glanced over his shoulder. "We keep this up, we'll run into the kind of trouble that doesn't ride on horses." "We already have," Emily said. "It just hasn't caught up yet." That evening, they reached a burned-out relay station. Roof gone. Water trough empty. But it gave them shelter from the wind. As Boone checked the perimeter and Lena cleaned her rifle, Emily found a half-buried crate under the floorboard's letters. Dozens of them. Sealed and yellowed, none delivered. She didn't open them, just stared at the names written in ink that had faded like promises. "They never left," she murmured. "Not really." Lena sat beside her, glancing at the bundle. "What do you think they said? Probably the same things we all say when we still believe someone's listening." She placed the letters back where she found them, covering them gently. The fire cracked, and the stars blinked on like slow confession. The next morning brought hoofbeats. Not theirs. Boone heard it first. Riders. More than a dozen. Coming fast. Emily didn't hesitate. Mount up. But as they crested the ridge to see who followed, they didn't find bounty hunters or gang scouts. They found a caravan. Women, children, old men. A ragged procession of wagons and pack mules strung together by exhaustion and will. At the front rode a woman with white braids and a rifle strapped to her saddle. She raised a hand. "You the ones took back Larksway." Emily didn't answer, just looked. The woman smiled, tired but fierce. "Didn't think legends traveled this far west. But we've been following your dust." They made camp together that night. Emily and her crew kept to themselves, but the others, freed folk from broken towns, watched them like they might be dreams wearing boots. One boy offered Boone a carved wooden horse. Boone took it, unsure what to do with kindness carved from firewood. Later, the woman with white braids sat beside Emily. "I'm called Ruth. I lost my son in a town called Carson's Well. They strung him up for teaching children to read." Emily looked at the fire. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Ruth said. "He'd still be dead if you hadn't made people believe they could push back." Emily didn't reply. Ruth leaned closer. "But you've got to be careful. Men like Reich, when they lose ground, they don't disappear. They regroup." Emily already knew. She had felt it in the way the birds no longer sang around them, in the way every town they freed seemed more watched than the last. "What do you want from us?" Ruth shook her head. "Nothing. We're going east now." But there's a town up ahead, Bentwood. Folks say it's still clean, but there've been strangers and missing people." Emily glanced at Boone. He nodded. Lena stood silently, already packing. "Then that's where we're headed." Ruth grinned. "I hope you make it through. World's still too dark to lose your fire." As the caravan turned east at dawn, Emily, Boone, and Lena rode west toward Bentwood. The trail stretched before them like a warning and a promise. And as the sun rose behind them, it threw their shadows far ahead, 3 figures against the rising heat, 3 stories still being written in the dust and blood of the frontier. Bentwood lay ahead like a mirage that hadn't yet decided if it wanted to be real. From a distance, it looked untouched, clean buildings, laundry flapping from porches, children playing in front yards. But as they rode in, Emily felt it immediately. Too quiet. Too polite. Like a song played just a bit off-key. The sheriff's office stood bright and freshly painted and neat white against the brown dust. A man in a pristine starched shirt stepped out to greet them. His badge shone like it had never seen a gunfight. "Morning, strangers," he said with a tight smile. New to town, Boone gave him a long look. "Passing through." "Well," the sheriff said, "we like peace in Bentwood. Troublemakers don't stay long." Emily dismounted slowly. "Funny. Seems like you've got peace, but not much joy." The sheriff's smile twitched. "Folks are disciplined. We like order." They were given rooms at the boarding house by a nervous woman who didn't ask questions, but watched everything. That evening, Emily strolled alone past the church, then the schoolhouse. She listened, heard birds, whined distant hammering. Normal sounds. But beneath them, like something scratching behind a wall, was a stillness that didn't belong. She noticed it in the way no one walked without looking behind them, and how every conversation ended too quickly. Something had coiled around Bentwood's spine. Later in the saloon, Boone played poker with local ranchers while Lena watched the doors. A man with a thick mustache leaned over and whispered to Emily, "You looking for someone, maybe? Then don't ask in public. Meet me at the old grain mill. Midnight." He vanished before she could ask more. At midnight, Emily went alone. The mill stood outside town, half collapsed and choked with weeds. She waited in the dark until the man appeared. "Name's Elijah," he said. "I used to be the blacksmith. They took my wife last spring. Said she was reading banned books." "Who's they?" Emily asked. "The sheriff. His deputies. They work for a man named Crayla. Owns the mine, the bank, and the church sermons on Sunday. They run this town like a theater. Everything looks clean, but inside." He swallowed. "Folks disappear. Kids, too. Why haven't you left?" Elijah looked down. "Some of us are trying to fight, but we don't know how. We heard about you. About Larksway. We hoped it was real." Emily said nothing. She just looked at him until he understood. By dawn, the plan had begun. Lena scouted the town from rooftops, sketching every route, every corner. Boone found the church basement, locked and guarded. They waited 3 days. Then Elijah slipped Emily a note. "They're moving the new captives tonight." Midnight. Through the chapel tunnels. The trio moved in silence. Emily led through the dark, each footstep echoing like judgment. They slipped past the pulpit beneath a trapdoor hidden under the altar. A long, damp corridor stretched beneath the church, lit with lanterns every few yards. Muffled voices ahead. Guards. Boone took one from behind with the butt of his rifle. Lena dropped the other with a throw that barely made a sound. They found the prisoners, 7 of them. Pale, starved, trembling. One girl clutched a book like a shield. Emily opened the gate. "You're safe now." "Not yet," the girl said. "He's coming." Crayley. They got them out before sunrise. Hid them at the mill. But it didn't take long. By noon, the town square held the sheriff, 10 deputies, and Crayle himself. He was tall, sunburnt, and wore a black suit that didn't match the dust. "You've made a mistake," he called out. "This town belongs to me. These people are mine." Emily stepped forward. "Not anymore." Gunfire broke the morning. Lena moved first, rolling behind the trough, her rifle cracking. Boone charged the gallows, flanking the deputies. Emily advanced straight toward Crayle. Bullets tore through the air. Townsfolk watched from behind curtains, too afraid to hope. Crayle fired first. Missed. Emily didn't. He fell with a look of disbelief, like he'd never imagined someone could say no to him and live. By evening, the sheriff was dead, the church burned, and Bentwood had breathed its first true breath in years. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just stood in silence, watching Emily, Boone, and Lina mount up again. As they rode west once more, someone whispered from a porch, "Thank you." Another said, "Godspeed." But most just stared, their hearts too full to find the right words. The trail out of Bentwood was steep-lined with brittle trees that had forgotten the taste of rain. Behind them, another town exhaled free for now. But freedom, Emily had learned, was a fire that needed tending. And somewhere out there, winds were gathering to snuff it out. They traveled in silence for miles, until Boone finally spoke. "That girl with the book." The way she held it like a weapon. "It was," Emily said. "More dangerous than any gun if someone knows how to read it." Lena rode ahead, scanning the horizon. Her hand rested near her rifle, but her eyes weren't hunting, more like remembering. "You think it'll ever end?" she asked. Emily didn't answer right away. "Not for us." They stopped that night at an old mail stop, half-collapsed roof, missing walls, scorched by some long-ago raid. Boone found dried beans in a sack under the floorboards. Lena made a fire, and Emily cleaned her revolver under moonlight. The stars above shimmered like frost on black silk. "We need supplies," Boone said. "Ammunition's low. So's medicine." Emily nodded. "Next town, we don't ride in. We watch first." Lena added, "And we don't split up." Not again. The next town was called Avery Hollow. It sat in a basin where the land bent inward, like a wound, the buildings sunken and weather-beaten. From the ridge, they saw no movement, no smoke, no sound. "Ghost town?" Boone asked. Emily narrowed her eyes. "Maybe. Or it's hiding." They waited until dusk, then crept in, guns drawn. Doors hung ajar, windows broken. But the food in the general store was only days old. Coffee still sat warm in the sheriff's office. Something had chased the town into silence fast. In the saloon, they found signs of struggle chairs, overturned blood on the floor, but no bodies. On the bar, someone had etched into the wood with a blade taken south. "Blackridge." Emily traced the letters with her fingertip. "We've heard that name before," Boone said. "South of the Mesas. A mining settlement that never made the maps." Lena tightened the strap on her pack. "We go." Emily nodded. "We go." The ride south was brutal heat, without wind dust that clung to the lungs and hills where the bones of wagons littered the ground. By the third day, they smelled smoke. Not campfire smoke. Coal. Tar. A deeper, angrier burn. Black Ridge rose from the desert, like a scab rows of shacks around a pit so deep it looked like it could swallow heaven. Men with rifles patrolled the rim. Slave labor. Prison camps. The kind of place whispered about, but never admitted. They made camp in the ravine and watched through a spyglass. Boone spotted a group of townsfolk from Avery Hollow being herded with chains. Lena recognized the girl with the coffee-stained dress from the saloon photo wall. "We go in tonight," Emily said. "Quiet. Fast. We get who we can and burn the rest." They moved like ghosts. Emily slit the perimeter fence with a wire saw. Boone slipped through the machinery yard, taking out 2 guards with a rope and a brick. Lena covered the tower with a borrowed rifle. In less than 30 minutes, they had freed 15 people. The rest were locked in the shaft cages underground. Emily faced a choice. "Either we go now, or we go down there," Boone whispered. "But we won't all come back up." She looked at the people she'd freed, bruised, limping, terrified. Then she looked at the mine. "They wouldn't leave us," she said. They went down. The shaft stank of rot and despair. Torchlight flickered over chains, cages, collapsed souls. When they reached the bottom, a man stepped from the shadows. Not a guard. Not a miner. A priest, or what was left of one. "They made me bless the walls," he said. "Said the earth needed prayers to stay quiet." "We're not here to pray," Emily said. They broke the cages. Helped men who could barely stand. One woman had no voice left, but gripped Emily's hand like a lifeline. But alarms rang. Guns roared. Light flooded the shaft mouth. They fought upward. Boone took a shot to the shoulder. Lena ran out of bullets and fought with a hammer. Emily dragged 3 children by their collars as fire spread through the machinery yard. They burst out just before the towers collapsed. Fire licked the sky. Smoke swallowed the stars. In the aftermath, Emily sat beside Boone as Lena stitched his wound. Around them, the rescued lay scattered like seeds waiting for wind. "We can't keep doing this," Lena said quietly. "They'll send more. Bigger. Smarter." Emily stared into the flames. "Then we stay ahead. Stay louder. Until there's nowhere left for men like that to hide." And after Boone asked, eyes half shut, Emily didn't reply. She just watched the fire rise. By dawn, the desert was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the silence after thunder, after blood and fire, where only ashes remember what happened. The survivors of Black Ridge stood at the edge of the burned-out camp, waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. No one spoke, until Emily did. "We'll lead you as far as the river bend," she said. "There's an old trail from there, heads north to the ridges. You'll find a canyon with fresh water. Shade. Maybe even hope." An old man with bandaged hands asked, "And what about you?" Emily didn't answer him directly. just looked out over the ashes, then at the saddle, waiting for her. Boone was already mounted, his shoulder wrapped tight. Lena had barely slept, her eyes hollow but clear. She stood close to Emily, now close like kin. "If we ride fast," Lena said, "we can hit the rail line by nightfall. That'll give us eyes on the next freight moving east." Emily nodded, but her gaze lingered. "They'll need someone to stand watch tonight," she said to the crowd. "Not all evil burns in fire. Some comes back." A woman from Avery Hollow stepped forward, barely 30, her blouse still dusted with mine soot. "We'll stay sharp. You gave us our names back." Emily offered a single nod, then turned her mare toward the south horizon, where the dust never quite settled. They didn't say goodbye. They just rode. Across dry valleys, where old bones poked from the earth like memories. Through windstorms that stripped the skin off silence. Past places no map remembered. They moved like a rumor carried on saddle leather, and grit never staying, always arriving. And in every town they passed, someone whispered a name. The sharpshooter in the duster coat with fire in her eyes. The scarred cowboy who bled for strangers. The woman who watched from shadows and never missed. And with each telling, the story grew. Not just of revenge, but of redemption. Of what it meant to fight, not because you hated what was ahead, but because you loved what stood behind. Boone once said the desert forgets. But he was wrong. It remembers the footsteps of those who walked with purpose. One night, months later, in a town where the law had grown crooked and the church doors stayed locked, a young girl saw 3 figures ride in beneath the moon. She watched from a rooftop, clutching a wooden doll. And as she whispered a name to the wind, Emily Cross, she smiled. Because legends she'd learned weren't born. They were carved into the land by those willing to bleed. And somewhere in the deep of the night, as coyotes howled and stars wheeled above a sleeping frontier, the dust rose again. The riders never stopped. Because somewhere else, someone needed saving. And Emily Cross, the gunslinger, who never blinked, would always be on her way.